Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Conscious Corner. I'm so excited to be joined today by two incredible guests, Carol O'Donoghue and Molly Weintrob, who are the co-founders of Mindful Birth and Parenting Philadelphia. Carol is a certified nurse midwife, family nurse practitioner, and perinatal mental health specialist with decades of experience supporting people through birth in hospitals, clinics, and community settings. She also teaches mindfulness and has a deep background in public health and family systems therapy. Molly is a licensed social worker, birth educator, doula, and psychotherapist who brings her lived experience as a parent and her work with families into everything she does. She also homeschools her 4 children, and my sense is that her mindfulness practice gets a lot of real life application. Together, Carol and Molly teach the mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting program, otherwise known as MBCP, which blends evidence-based childbirth education with the power of mindfulness practice. It's a course that supports not only labor and delivery, but the full experience of becoming and being a parent. So great big welcome to you both. I'm so happy to have you here. And I'm really interested to learn more about the MBCP program. But just to give you both and listeners a little bit of a backstory, I became really interested in mindfulness through my first pregnancy. I have 3 sons, the oldest being 15. The middle guy is 11, and the youngest is 8 going on 18, I say. But I really didn't know anything about mindfulness. I think it's fair to say that even just 10 years ago, it wasn't as well known as it is current day. But when I was pregnant, I was living in the city of Philadelphia, and I was really interested in having a natural birth with no or little medical intervention. So I took one of the birthing classes that was offered at Penn State, and it wasn't very meaty, but there was a handout, just some papers stapled together. And on one of the pages was this little black and white diagram of an ocean. And it showed the progression of what is a wave in the ocean. And there was an analogy made between the wave of an ocean with a contraction. And the invitation was just as if you were out in the ocean and you were enjoying the water and a wave came, just sort of letting your body float over the crest of the wave. And then as the wave dissipated, letting the body soften and coming to the bottom of the wave. And it made perfect sense of that. Just, it was counterintuitive to what I thought and what I had seen in terms of contraction, and you tighten the body and sort of fight the experience. But this invitation to just rest, to just let the body kind of ride the wave, so to speak, really resonated with me. So much so, not only in the experience of labor and delivery, but beyond that, like into my life, how often we want the water to be just so, or the conditions of our lives to be just so, but how we have a choice to relax, to let go, and to let be. So I just wanted to put that out there. That was really without knowing it, that was my introduction to mindfulness and how we can invite a bit of ease, even in moments that can be as challenging as birth. And so I wanted to see if you can explain to us more about your program, the MBCP program.
I love that you got that just in a diagram and a
I did.
worksheet.
I'm a
The
very
crux of the matter.
I'm a very visual person, and sometimes, people can tell me this, that, and the other and talk until they can't breathe anymore. But sometimes just seeing a little image, it really hits home for me. And that I wish I had it. I saved every possible piece with each of my three sons, from the bracelets that you wear in the hospital to my journals, but I cannot, for the life of me, I can't find those few pages. But it was it's implanted in my mind, and it was really the seed that I've since watered, and it's grown in miraculous ways in my life. That being mindfulness. So yeah, so I'm really interested. I'm fascinated with what you teach. I've seen the ways that it can be transformational, not only in birth experience and parenting, but beyond.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Molly took from what you said in the introduction. And the thing that struck me is your description of inviting ease. For me, when you were talking, I experienced it more of your letting go of the resistance
Mm,
of like when you kind of like let yourself the resistance go down to the bracing, like you were saying,
yeah.
first off, then there was room for that
Yeah.
ease to come in.
Yeah. And one of the experiences
Did
that
you
I
get
had,
that? Sorry, my
yeah, one of the experiences that I had that really helped hone in on just how much we can tighten the muscles and resist what's here is I had a doula for all three births, the same doula, Tammy Arbiter, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but she's was a lactation consultant, at least at the time when I was pregnant with all three boys. And it was either through her, or it may have been a book that I read, Nancy, I'm gonna possibly botch the last name, Bardacke.
Nancy Bardacke.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Bardacke, okay,
Mhm.
got it right. But I think it may have been in her book where we practice, again, we kind of like dip our toes into what strong sensation feels like. And in this case, it was my fingers, but putting our hands in a bucket of ice and
Mhm.
knowing that, after a little while, it maybe or definitely feels very cold, but knowing that we don't, we can invite some ease. There can be less resistance when we bring a sense of curiosity, let ourselves be with the experience, as opposed to like, oh my God, I got to get my hand out of here. I got to get rid of this. So all these little introductions before really understanding what mindfulness is, it made a lot of sense to me. And I think I was able to lean into it and to see how it really was supportive. Fast forward to actually going through the birthing process, it's transformational. So
Mhm.
I was interested. I know there are a lot of childbirth classes out there, but I was interested in learning more about how the MBCP program is different than traditional childbirth education.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that you're bringing out, Courtney, that I think is really important is that it is experiential. Like we can talk about mindfulness as long as we want. And I know that Carol and I love to do that. So we could do that for hours, right? And we always tell our students, like, we can just talk about this. But what you had that came through in that image, and also in the sensation experience of just touching ice and holding your hand there and doing something different than we would normally do, which is to just automatically pull away, is an experience of mindfulness, right? Like, what is another way to orient to our experience, right? What happens if we turn toward it instead of turn away from it? And that, I think, is really the sort of crux of what's different about MBCP, which stands for mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting, which is a sort of variation on the mindfulness-based intervention of mindfulness-based stress reduction. So there's lots of mindfulness-based interventions, and MBCP is one of them. So it is both a childbirth education course, but also a mindfulness skills course, kind of combined into one. So we're doing a lot of talking about birth and teaching the kind of thing that people want to know when they come to a birth class, like what is likely to happen, or what is the sort of general arc, even though we can't ever know what will happen, of course, which is why we're doing the mindfulness part. Like, what's the general arc of what this looks like, right? What are the things that may likely happen on the way from you going from being pregnant to actually having this baby? But the sort of piece that doesn't get taught other places is the sort of experience and practicing of mindfulness skills. Right. So we do that exercise with ICE, but we do it for 3 different classes for an extended period of time, where we
Yeah.
practice going in for contractions and coming out, and just like working with tools that we've been developing, for example, to practice with that experience of cold, just
Yeah.
cold in the hands. So maybe Carol, do you want to add about just arc of the class?
Yeah, that's perfect. And then I would also say that I think you're right, Courtney, that over the last 10 years in particular, there have been just a plethora of mindfulness um, podcasts and apps and opportunities of people really getting much more widely known. And I think that I think that's great. And we definitely advocate people doing that. But this, what we do in the class, which is I know what you do in your MBSR classes too, is teach mindfulness in a supported way, because we always say anything that can be that beneficial can also potentially bring up things that are difficult. And this is an intense time when you're pregnant, you know, and as a couple, and what you're about to even no matter what number of child it is.
Yeah.
So we that ice that we do, the ice practice, is not in the first class.
Right.
You know, it's supported not only by being introduced to mindfulness practices and practicing them in a supported way, but also introducing a framework of how to experience discomfort and pain. And so some of the teachings that we have in our class are very specific to mindfulness and childbirth, like a different orientation that you can only kind of relate to the experience when you're starting to practice. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a little bit of a different language that you're learning, and with your partner too. Your partner is learning it as well.
And I think to both your points, it's a learning that you get to do together with a partner, which that in and of itself can be such a bonding and connecting point, especially during such a pivotal point in our lives, both as the woman being pregnant and her partner. And I think that the experiential end is so important because, like you said, I think we could spend 3 hours on this podcast talking about mindfulness, but people really need to taste the fruits of the practice. And when you can lean into that and
Right.
see how powerful it can be, it you can gain a lot of insight. And during a time where there's so much uncertainty, especially, I wouldn't even say I thought it was when you're first pregnant, like it's new, you've never been down this road before necessarily. But I found with my third, the comparing mind, because you
Right.
knew what birth one, birth two was like, I was more, and different things came up. Again, this uncertainty, you can't control every aspect of, you can plan only so far, but you honestly don't know. So how can we be with that in really skillful, nourishing ways during a time that there's so much taking place physically, emotionally? So to be able to learn in community, the support of knowing that there's a sense of belonging, you're not alone in this, that you're together with other people who are experiencing the same fears, the same concerns, I think is so supportive. But I also, Molly, you said something about information, and maybe you can touch upon this a little more, but I know for myself, having had Tammy as my doula, and to get information that doesn't necessarily come through a book like What to Expect When You're Expecting, but to see the good, the bad, the ugly, to have this information and knowledge really allows us to make more conscious decisions when we're in the heat of things. But and you can go into this more if you care to. What I think brings things to another level, another layer of support that your program offers, is by learning mindfulness, we can get in touch with these inner resources that are within us. They're already here. And I know for me, a sense of trust, like a trust of my body, a sense of strength. And that doesn't always come through, I think, with other childbirth programs. You get the information, which is helpful to help you make conscious decisions, but that sense of inner strength and other qualities that can be cultivated with your program, if you could talk more about some of these qualities that can really be watered and nurtured by attending your program.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Carol and I always say information is great, and we are major advocates of information. That's in large part how we both got into birth work, I think. And information is not what gets any of us through any sort of raw existential experience in life, right? Like, which birth just is, right? And it's one of those moments, like why I think so many people are interested and willing to take a birth class, right? This is something Nancy Bardicke talks about. Like, this is a moment where people are sort of like, whoa, I'm coming into contact with real life and you cannot escape it, and we spend so much of our lives like trying to buffer ourselves from real life, right? And there are moments when we can't, and birth and death are I think the sort of like two biggest versions of that, although there's all kinds of other, like just engaging with other people in relationship in any real ways. Like, it's hard. This is, we got to bring our full selves to the table. It's demanding, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of, when you're talking about sort of like we can only plan or control for so much, that's like a huge part of what we teach about and talk about in this class. And as Carol's saying, like way later, like right 2/3 of the way through in this curriculum, which is a 9-week curriculum, we talk about like what are the things we can control and what are the things we can't, right? And as it turns out, the things on that latter list it's a way longer list on that side.
Yeah.
But mindfulness is about like how we can orient ourselves, right? What we can actually have control over, which is our choice in how to respond in any moment to what is emerging in the moment, right? Which, in a sort of universal context is like always true, right? But again, these sort of experiences like birth really bring that to the forefront in a way that none of us can ignore, right? So yeah, exactly, those inner resources. And you're reminding me of my second labor. I remember this before I read Nancy's book and trained with her. I just remember finding myself with like my hands on the wall, and just saying to myself, hands on the wall, hands on the wall, hands on the wall, hands. And that's like, and that was something I read in Birthing from Within. Shout out. But it sort of came through, and it was like, oh, I get why. I get it. I just need to stay here, right?
Yeah.
And that was like those inner resources just coming through, right?
Yeah. It's intuitive. I think, it's within each of us. And with practice, with training, we can just connect more fully with them. So I know John Kabat-Zinn and his wife, they wrote a book on mindful parenting, and John has said, not specifically as it relates to childbirth, but that mindfulness practice is like the analogy uses is as a parachute. Like, we want to be weaving the strands of a parachute so that when it comes time that we really need to use these resources, that they're here for us, rather than, when that time comes and our parachute isn't woven as it should be, we may feel stuck. So it's a really wonderful way to prepare yourself, and to, even in those moments where something comes up that wasn't planned for, we can become more resilient, more open to be with experience. So I know I appreciated that, and it wasn't until my third son where I actually was a mindfulness practitioner, I had a better understanding. But I do think it's very intuitive, it's natural, and when we can connect with it, it's just another tool in our tool belt that can be very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think go ahead, Carol.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think the what you said before also is so important, people doing this in community and having a community of practitioners, which is really the attitude of the course, right? Like we're all, not only are we all sort of here in this together in this predicament that we've all gotten ourselves into somehow, luckily, but terrifyingly, and but here we are, but also we're like learning something together. And not only are we learning something together, this is not a passive course, right?
Yeah.
We always tell people when we talk to them on the phone, which is why we do that before they sign up for this class, like we are going to ask you to engage actively in this class. And if you're looking for a sort of like passive experience, this just isn't a great match, right? This is an engagement and a practice, and you're joining a community of practitioners that's much larger even than this class. I mean, there's hundreds of people that have come through certainly this course all over the world, but also even just through us teaching it in these last 10 years. So I don't want to forget about the inner resources and come back to that, but maybe Carol, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, what I was thinking about with the inner resources, and it also ties into just people who might be interested in this class, are that, part of what we're learning is you use the word conditioning in the beginning, Courtney. So what's the conditioning that we come to this moment, really? Everything that led up to this moment, where does my mind go? What are my patterns? All of that stuff we bring to this moment sitting here together, for example, and when we slow down and we practice with mindfulness, formal mindfulness practice, we get a chance to sort of sit back and watch and learn about that.
Yeah.
And we talk about birth as being this intense time, and it's sort of this is related to the information. The information we know when we're stressed, the information goes out the window and we go into the fight or flight or the fawn or freeze, and we are not in our integrated selves in our mind where we can access, I remember reading that about second stage labor. I remember it's not, and I'll tell you, even people don't retain it from one class to the next class. So information is important, but we also have you had your doula there to
Yeah.
be, the person you would ask, and the care team. And now we have our digital handheld computers that we can also access. And we do our homework beforehand. Where am I going to look? Where am I going to go? Who am I going to choose to be in the room with me?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So we bring this conditioning, and I will say for some people, when you said it's intuitive, it is intuitive, and for other people, it's not. So, there's trait mindfulness. Like we all know people that seem to be able to ground themselves easier than others, you know,
Yeah.
and we're very envious of those people, or, that's the way they might not describe it like that themselves, but, we can only take care of our own self. So, what I would say about our class, or just any mindfulness training, is that it's everybody's welcome, like wherever you are on that skill level, to be able to access, okay, I'm going to be able to ground myself, or I know my own patterns so that I can pause and make a choice. And I'll say that sometimes, and we say this all the time in our mindfulness class, the biggest contraction you have may not be during your labor. It might be when you're going to your anatomy scan and there's something that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
It might be many times over the temper tantrum that happens very publicly on the floor of the Acme, and you're really feeling stressed about that. So and it's stressful, as a parent. Every day can be whatever happens. So that is the motivation for learning the skill too, is just to be like, can I access that at all moments of life? Because we don't know when our contractions are going to be coming and going.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm so, yeah, intuitive. So I should speak for myself. It was intuitive to me, but I think the better word is that it's innate, that we don't have to go anywhere
Right.
to buy these qualities. They're already within us, but with
And we all have the capacity,
the
is kind of
capacity,
what I hear you saying. Yeah.
the natural capacity, but
Yeah.
even though they're here doesn't mean that they're easily accessible. But through a program such as yours with skilled practitioners, that we can learn how to strengthen them, and that comes with practice. So thank you for pointing that out. And I love that you're mentioning how the program can help us to identify our patterns. Because I know for myself, you can hear war stories. I feel like people find out you're pregnant and say the craziest things, and we can get in our own way. We can get caught up in the loop of the stories we tell ourselves. So
Absolutely.
to be able to identify that, that's so liberating, because then we don't have to buy into that inner narrative. So that was really helpful for me, especially having had my third son when I was 40 years old. There was a whole stigma, a whole kind of story that came along with that, and the what ifs, and the mind can just get pulled in so many scary directions. So the more and more we can notice our habitual tendencies, the more we can let go of them, the more we can find ways to really nourish ourselves. And there was getting back, sorry, I'm like a ping pong ball, but each of you are saying things that are bringing a lot up for me. Molly, the the lack of being able to control everything, but you were saying there are some things we can control. And the fight or flight, the freeze or fawn, in those moments where something comes up and it's not what we planned for, the great news is that we don't have to fall into reactivity. That with training, with practice, we may notice that we're becoming reactive, or we're falling into pilot mode of worrying about what's to come. But that clear seeing is what gives us the choice to find an inner calm. And for me, especially in those moments when things kind of heighten during whether it's the birthing process or it's being a parent. And to your point, Carol, there's a meltdown in like aisle 3 of the supermarket, and you feel like you're gonna snap. It's how do we reset? How do we calm ourselves so that we can respond in more conscious ways? And without, I think, some of the training that I've had, I wouldn't have made some as skillful, maybe, but probably not. I wouldn't have made as skillful childbirth, but in being a parent and in being in the world as we know it. So I love that your program teaches partners and women who are expecting not only tools of how to support themselves in childbirth, but it really does, it's all encompassing. It's not like it's limited just to that period of your life. It carries its way through all of parenthood. So
Not only that, but we also, like, we always tell people, like, this will be useful during birth, but it's going to be vital after birth.
yeah,
Right. So like it's a birth class, but
yeah,
really, the information, like Carol was saying, that we get from any normal birth class is like so enormous and important, but it sort of ends there. And with this class, we've always felt like it's kind of the opposite. It like really just begins to be
yeah,
really useful once you've given birth already.
yeah. I think I noticed just from the ages of my kids, 15. I have to think about it sometimes. How old are they again? 15, 11, and 8. That someone told me this, like little kids, babies, little problems, big kids, bigger problems. And so I just keep seeing the ways in which the practice, my mindfulness practice and my commitment to it continues to support me as the sort of obstacles or challenges grow exponentially. But I did want to circle back to this fact that we can't control every facet of our birth experience. And being that I am very much a planner and a type A person, I know how disappointing it can be when things don't go as planned. And I work with a lot of, I think I had told you, Carol, that I worked as an attorney for almost 20 years. And I now support a lot of litigators and other legal practitioners with mindfulness to reduce stress and anxiety. But I know on a whole that attorneys can be hugely critical of themselves. They're very judgmental, and it comes from a good place. They want to do a good job. They want to get great outcomes for their clients. I've seen a lot of women, female attorneys, who carry that perfectionist quality or way into what their expectations are with birth. And I know for myself, when I was working with Tammy, she said, okay, you can have a birth plan, but this is going to be a very loose plan because we don't know what's going to come up. So do you see that come up, whether it's with high achievers, attorneys, or other professionals or human beings who have this more rigid mindset? Do you deal a lot with that? And can you talk a bit about how mindfulness can help women be less judgmental when things maybe don't go exactly as planned?
Yeah,
We
I
could
mean,
flip a
there's
coin.
no, I think the beauty about well, first of all, I think it's a very uh I call it an American, I'm not sure what it is, Western, concept of like we can control things, we can control nature, we can control our lives if we do everything the right way. I study, I'm good I mean, obviously attorneys are great students, have done things and being an attorney is you're following rules. Like there's a rule book and
Yeah,
you're the expert in that rule book and
yeah,
you're trying to, right? So I think it makes sense that it's like it kind of flips all of your preconceived notions on their head to be entering this mindfulness world, right? But what's really amazing is that the just trusting in the practice, like being really open to seeing what happens in this experiential way. One of the things that happens when we sit down and sit in practice is we just notice that we're not even in control of our own mind. Like the thoughts just come in and you're like, where did that come from? And you don't have, it's the most essential experience, to be realizing, wow, I'm really not in control. And then we get used to what that brings up for us, not being in control. And we
mm,
explore that with kindness and generosity and a beginner's mind. And, our tendency, our conditioning might be like, well, where does that come from? And why am I thinking like that? And why? And that's where the beating ourselves up comes in.
yeah,
So then we just, with the next breath, we relax into, oh, that's just there. Let me be curious about it and meet it with some patience, or, all of the attitudinal foundations that we work with that we use in MBSR, we also bring in a lot with MBCP. And softening happens and people, and as Molly was saying, the MBCP teaching on causes and conditions does not come, it comes at the end, because if it came at the beginning, it would be like a foreign language.
yeah,
But by the end, people have the practice under their belt, and then they're like, oh yeah, I see that now, and I can allow it to be there. And we actually do the teaching as a formal practice as well. So it's an important thing, and I think that there is that resistance a lot of times, especially for people who are used to being in a lot of control, who really seek that out,
yeah,
to wrestle with that, and that's okay. I mean, that got to you to where you were in some ways, but in parenting, it's really a different story. Like we are giving birth to these human beings. We say all the time, you're giving birth to your mindfulness teacher,
yeah,
and on a daily basis, you get to practice. And you know, so that's some of my thinking about control. Um, yeah, and expectations around a birth are normal. It's okay to have plans and preferences. Um, and it's also important to know that it can be a relief, actually, to know not that much of it is in my control.
yeah. You're only in
Um,
control of so much when you take that rigidity away. I think there's a sense of freedom where it's like,
yeah,
okay, what'll be will be. But that's not
yeah,
always the way we're conditioned, especially to your point, there's rules, there's regulations, and as lawyers, and I'm sure other professions, but
Yeah.
We're so used to there being a right and a wrong way. And when we carry that into the birthing experience, if they don't go what we think is the right way, I've seen this come up with friends. They have these
Yeah.
beautiful, healthy children, and they had a hell of an experience with the birthing. I mean, they're like warriors. I'm in awe of what they did, and yet they still berate
Yeah.
themselves because it wasn't the right way or what they thought, you
Yeah.
know. So I think when we can be less judgmental, when we can be gentle and kind and compassionate, almost as if we were being our own good friend, and the way we would be so nurturing to if one of our children fell and scraped their knee, we would be
Yeah.
really loving and compassionate. But we so often, and maybe I speak a bit for myself, we tend to be less forgiving. But to see that, again, getting back to what you said, Carol, about these patterns, the more and more we see it, that becomes a gateway to fostering, to watering seeds of kindness, compassion,
Mhm.
care.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think also, Courtney, one thing that you're talking about that comes across so strongly is like this is a population you work with, and we certainly see this a lot in our classes. When we talk about the attitudinal foundations of practice, the one that always hits home, like I'd say 85% of the time, is non-striving, right?
Mm,
And that's
yeah.
because we live in a culture where striving is highly valued, right?
Yeah.
And like Carol was saying, striving is great, right? Like no one's trying to get anyone not to strive anymore, right?
Right.
And yet we're sort of expanding the possibilities when we talk um, about striving and non-striving, right? Like so, we all, I think, are aware. I mean, I've never been a lawyer, but one thing I know about them is they work damn hard, you know,
Yeah.
and that is highly
Mhm.
valued in our culture, right? And it's amazing. I think we have accomplished so much culturally by working so hard. And when we only work really hard, we miss out on a lot of other um, possibilities and experiences in life, right? So we're constantly sort of bringing in this sort of like doing and being, right? Mindfulness
Mhm.
practice is so much about being, and the culture that we live in is so much about doing, and
Yeah.
both are really important, right? So I think that there is something there for people who tend to come in as, intense strivers, which is very common.
Mhm.
But I think what's beautiful as I'm listening to both of you talk and thinking about this is like, there's an attitudinal foundation for everyone's sort of like constriction, right? It's like
Yeah.
for those who have the inner critic as a really strong piece of their life, compassion comes in as the sort of antidote balancer to that,
Mhm.
right? For
Yeah.
those who are high achievers or strivers, non-striving and non-judgment come in um, as a sort of antidote or balancer for that, right? For people who are highly reactive in every moment, curiosity comes in as a sort of like balancing attitudinal foundation, right? And those are the, patience and trust, as you mentioned, and letting be, like all of these have their sort of character,
Yeah.
that they attend to various parts of ourselves that can get stuck on one track, or in one extreme. And so I think, it's incredibly fruitful for folks who are high achievers, um, and it's incredibly fruitful for everyone else too, right? There's like the inner resources that we're talking about are those innate pieces of being human that we just like all are missing contact with various parts in different ways.
Mhm.
And I should add, and I'll include this in the description for our listeners and viewers, but when we talk about these attitudinal foundations, traditionally there are 7 of them that can be cultivated through regular practice of mindfulness. But there's a YouTube video, which I'll share in the description, that John Kabat-Zinn has. He actually
Yeah.
has 9. I think someone told me there was 2 more, that there may even be 11.
Yes. Yeah.
If for all of you who are listening and you're like, what are these mindfulness attitudes? I'll share in the link. They are basically different qualities that exist within each of us, but that we can strengthen with regular practice of mindfulness. And John does a really nice job at giving little tidbits about each of them. So I wanted to ask if each of you want to take a few moments, and if we can share with our audience one piece of advice or encouragement that you'd offer someone who's expecting, or maybe parents who are feeling overwhelmed or a bit unsure. if there's anything that you'd like to share with them as a gem of encouragement.
I mean, I'll share one piece of our Nancy's curriculum that I think really carries people, which is the idea of horticultural time, right? That you are sort of entering when you sort of embark on the journey of pregnancy and parenthood, you are entering a different sort of time as opposed to industrial time, which is sort of the time that our general world tends to work on, clock time, where we can measure things, figure out when something is going to happen, expect it to happen, rely on it happening, right? Plan for things, like all the sort of stuff that we're talking about that is kind of bedrock to the functioning of how things tend to go in our regular kind of like working lives or regular live functioning lives. And horticultural time is the time that like beings move on, right? Plants and babies and children and us too, right? As it turns out, we also are still living organismic beings that are not, functioning on a clock. But that is just sort of a piece that I think really frames things for people differently. If you can imagine, like pregnancy is going to happen in its way and birth is going to happen in its time, which we cannot predict or control or plan for. And the baby that is going to be landing here, or babies, is like they're a mystery, right? And
Yeah.
they're coming as themselves, right? And all they're going to do is just keep becoming themselves. They're not a sort of empty bottle that we fill and make how we want them to be, sadly. Right. There's sort of like there's a sort of organismic quality to it. And when I look at my plant in the background, it's like always what I tell people to just look at, like, that you can watch a plant and you can be like, something is happening in there, but I don't see it, and then one day you look and you're like, oh my God, there's like 3 new leaves that just unfurled themselves while I was sleeping. Right. And I had no idea. And that's horticultural time, right? That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
basis of birth and parenting, I think, in a lot of ways.
I love that. And being the image person I am, like I have this image of a clock in when we had physical space at Jefferson where we taught the MBSR program. There was a clock, and there's the traditional clock has 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, and goes around. Well, the clock we had just said now, 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 all around the
Yeah.
clock, and it's really just opening to this moment just as it is, and it's a different way of being in your relationship to time. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Molly. Carol, do you have
Mm.
any piece or pieces of encouragement or wisdom you can share?
Yeah, we also give out, originally we would give out the now, and you could put it up in your labor room,
Yeah,
on the wall, and use that. So I think when you said that first, the first thing that came to mind was sort of taking the long view, which I think is what Molly is describing. And hearing Molly describe it, my kids are in their early 20s, they still need parenting, it turns out, which is a joy. But I also, um, you know, it brings me back to just taking care of this moment now, that again, control, is that everything is encapsulated just in this moment. I can take care of this moment in this way. And when we have a practice, we know what that means. We can begin again. We can just begin again and begin again. And it's all those little moments that add up to this, you know, person going off and becoming a young adult and living their life. And then we're back with ourselves with different set of expectations and everything. And we can just begin again. And I think that's been such a gift of practice and of just being able to relax into our lives. And when we do that, we see for ourselves what it brings, no expectations, but it takes practice, and it's not the way that our industrial culture is conditioned. So we need support, and we need each other to help cultivate that experience. And really it's for the benefit of all beings. And Nancy talks about the intergenerational patterns of suffering, and patterns that we want to, wholesome patterns that we want to pass on. And so when we are in more right relationship with our present moment, and we're really present, then we can moment by moment, experience by experience, decide how, make choices that are more in alignment with our true nature, true beautiful natures.
I believe that our personal choices, they ripple out and they affect
Yeah.
others, our interconnectedness, it can be felt, it can be seen. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time, both of your time together with me and with our listeners, our viewers. If somebody wants to connect with you and find out more about the MBCP program or wants to work with you, how is best for them to connect?
They should go to our website, Mindful Birth Philadelphia.
Okay.
They can find us easily there. Um, we are regularly running classes for expectant parents, and we are always, and have always been really since we started, like trying all kinds of different experimental ways to support parents who already have children in working with the practice. So there are resources there for expectant and already parents. And if people want to find my therapy website, they can look up tendingandattending.com.
And
Tending.
there's also there's links to tending and attending on the website as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say, just one thing, if you are expecting and you are interested in this class, it takes some planning because it's a long class. We do offer intensives, and we don't offer them, they aren't running every single month. So I would say, sooner rather than later, this is where the planning mind is good, is to, take a look, and we can we can not interview you, but we can have a conversation on the phone where you decide if this is a good fit for you too.
Great, great. Thank you so much. And just to piggyback off of what you shared, Molly, with supporting parents where they are and offering resources that can bring ease into this. I don't want to call it, I guess it is a job, being a parent, but how can we support ourselves to be in what can often be challenging, but also that sense of community where we can feel carried by the weight, or sorry,
Mhm.
carried by the support of community. The Center for Mindfulness at Jefferson will be offering on October 4th a virtual workshop, a 3-hour workshop for parents, and how mindfulness can be woven into our roles as parents to support ourselves and to support our children. So, a great big thank you to you both for being here together with me and to sharing all of this really valuable information with our audience. So, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you for having
too.
us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.